It seemed to me as though Matt Campbell's mindset going into this was, this is a tough game. We're in a tough spot. We've been dealt a tough hand, with the travel and the opponents, the schedule so far. Uh, you know, Arkansas State's a plucky team. They've got a good quarterback. They've got a good receiver. They're not a great defense, but they've got good team speed anyways, as Matt Campbell put it. Just, you know, it was one of those where I think the program was relatively happy to just go down and get a win, play as well as they can, but go down, get a win, get out type of thing. Get to the bye week undefeated, and that's your success. And they did that. I mean, they got to 4-0. The fourth was not super satisfying, but most people, I think even most Cyclone fans, I mean, there's a plenty of them that had us at 4-0 because we kind of like, well, we're going to beat Kansas State. We always beat Kansas State, and Iowa's going to be bad this year. And, otherwise they're two cupcakes. The path of logic to say they're going to be 4-0 was fairly straightforward. But I think a lot of people have been Iowa State fans for a long time. They hedge their bets. They're like, well, we'll lose one out of Kansas State or Iowa, get to the break 3-1 type of thing. And then you're in good shape. 2-2 if something really went wrong, but you're still not really out of anything at that point. I would say most people were in the 3-1 camp. I would say it's 4-0. They're number 12 in the AP poll. They might drop down a little bit this week because they're not playing and somebody will win, though somebody will win a big game. But so they might drop down to 13 or 14 or something like that, just by virtue of somebody winning. But you're in the top 15. You're 4-0. You're coming back home to Jack Trice Stadium after a bye week. You've got time to do what you got to do, to get healthy, to get rested, to get back on track, and to feel like you're in the middle of a normal season again. And this is a great opportunity for Iowa State to just recharge, which I think it seemed to me, had everything gone to plan and they've been able to take a normal drive in the second quarter instead of giving up that long drive after the roughing the punter. Had it all gone to plan, that game, I think that game goes. Game goes much different than it did. And they don't give up. Maybe they go on a longer drive, even if they go 3 and out on offense again. That's still breaking up the defensive possessions. You can keep them fresh. And then we're singing a different tune if that one play doesn't happen. You got to remember that coming out of that game, Iowa State, generally speaking, played fairly well at Arkansas State. They won their clunker, but I shouldn't say they played fairly well. They could have played better, but their, like I said, their rate stats look pretty good, and there's enough to build on from that to say, okay, we've got a few things we've got to clean up, but they're fixable. I don't think we saw anything this past week that feels like a long-term problem. The special teams was bad. Special teams on Saturday was bad all the way around, multiple facets. The only thing that could potentially become a long-term thing for Iowa State is the kicker situation, which we'll talk about here in a second. Tyler Perkins dropping the ball in the end zone. It's not going to happen again. The roughing the punter, they can coach that up. They can be more selective with when they use that. I'm not expecting that to be a long-term trend or anything like that. The special teams thing was not great, but I don't think there was anything I saw us outside of the kicker injury that was like a long-term concern. Defense was fine. I mean, they took longer than we probably wanted to adjust and to start, get a spy on Jalen Rayner to kind of corral his run game. It probably took a little bit longer than people wanted it to, or were hoping it would. But I think Iowa State was making a value proposition there, where they were given the option of potentially letting a team that they want to be aggressive. They want to take shots downfield. And they've got an NFL receiver in Corey Rucker. Do you let a team like that get a couple big plays, get some momentum, and maybe they end up busting one and they get a touchdown out of it? Do you do that, or do you sit back be okay with Jalen Raynor running a little bit, and they're going to go on long drives, but you're going to roll the dice that eventually they're going to have a miscue. They're going to, one play, a third down is going to be poorly executed. They're going to make a mistake someplace. And, that's how you can stop your drives basically. And I think that was the value proposition that Iowa State was faced with. And they chose, let's not let this team that's fresher than us, that has good team speed, that has big play capability, let's not let them, you know, keep in this with deep shots downfield with big plays. Let's make them earn this thing. Like if they're gonna beat us, they need to do it by playing the way we want them to play and executing like perfectly all game. And I think that was the dilemma they were faced with. Cause I think for Iowa State, it's if you put a spy on Jalen Raynor, do you feel as though you can play adequate coverage in the back end with one less defender? I mean, eventually, Iowa State, I think, just kind of came to the conclusion that they had to take that a little bit of a gamble with that and put a spy out there and deal with it a little bit better. And fortunately, it worked out okay. They got the Trey Bell interception and all that, and they eventually slowed Arkansas State down. But early in the game, I can't necessarily blame them for not just immediately switching to using a spy on this. I think that's what Arkansas State was kind of trying to do. They were trying to get extra guys out of coverage so that way they could take a deep shot and try to hit on a couple big plays and see if you can catch lightning in a bottle with that, and then make Iowa State play from behind and try to counter big plays with long drives, which as anybody can, a lot of people can, you've seen plenty of football in your life, is that, a team that's connecting on explosive plays is harder to keep up with is hard to keep up with if your only way of scoring is by methodically marching down the field. Now, Iowa State ended up putting together a number of good explosive plays through the game, but that's the choice that they were weighed with. And I think if I was John Haycock, would I have switched to using a spy earlier in the game? Maybe a little bit earlier. Probably, I think I probably would have done it earlier, like in the third quarter, like when they were on that second long drive. But I can't really blame them for not choosing to do that earlier, because they needed to get to a spot where they felt like an explosive play wasn't going to force them to play catch up all game, and they could get out to a lead or something like that. And then once you're playing with like an 8-point lead, like they were eventually able to get as an 8-point lead. Once you have that, and even an explosive play and a 2-point conversion still gives you a tie game, you can take a better risk with that, and you can spy, and you can be like, okay, we still trust our secondary to cover down the field, but we really want to bottle this up to make life a little bit more difficult for them, and basically force them to take and connect on a deep shot against what we believe is a very good secondary. You have more insurance. You have your insurance built in there later in the game once you've got that 8-point lead, and I think that's when they switched. Had they had that full 8-point or more lead in the third quarter, I think they switch. I think they switch to putting a spy on Jalen Raynor. I think they get a little bit more aggressive and trying to attack him versus basically just sitting back and letting him just kind of nickel and dime you down the field a little bit. I think they switch earlier if the offense is able to get one more score at some point earlier in the game. So, like I said, it was frustrating in real time, but having a chance to kind of reflect on it and go back and look at it, I think they probably did the right thing. When you're weighing risk and reward based on what you think they can do and what you're not sure if you can defend, when in doubt, always take away the big play and make them drive the field and make them consistently execute. Credit goes to Arkansas State. For the most part, they did. They executed over and over and over and over and over again. And eventually, the gamble for Iowa State paid off. They didn't execute on a few plays. They got the ball back. They score. Now you can get more aggressive. So I think Iowa State did about as good a job as they could working with what they had to work with in terms of fatigue and injuries and the flow of the game, what Arkansas State was doing, what they were giving them. Overall, I think while it was a rough game to watch, I think it was a well coached football game because I think a poorly coached football team folds in that. They let the penalty kind of haunt them. They let it kind of linger over the game plan. Maybe they make a mistake. Maybe Rocco doesn't hit that throw down the sideline. I think Iowa State winning that game is a sign that the floor is fairly high for Iowa State. The middle of the roster is very solid. It's a well coached football team. They don't commit a lot of penalties, and I just I think you can come out of that game finding some foundational things that were really good that Iowa State can build on and be like, okay, this is our platform going forward. This is how we're gonna win. DQ says, I think they thought they could get a 10 to 14 point lead and force them to play differently, but the offense kept dropping ball. I think you're dead on right there. I couldn't agree more. I think that's exactly what happened. I think the plan was to get out to a 2-score lead, which is why they were taking shots early on. First play of the game, they take a shot. I think that is why they were getting really aggressive with the passing game early on. They wanted to get a big lead and they wanted to be able to play with a multi-score lead, be okay with being a little more aggressive and be able to play where you're not terrified of them hitting a deep ball or breaking off explosive play. And I think that, the drops, a couple of the missed throws, all that kind of went to hell in a handbasket. And then they just kind of had to play this kind of dirty grind out game. I think that's why the game was the way it was. They had a path to victory that included them just playing with a good lead the whole game. And the other path to victory is we're going to have to play a close game and we're going to have to out execute these guys. And over a long enough timeline, Iowa State out executed Arkansas State, and they were out talented Arkansas State. They did a good job. They did a good job winning a game that was basically built for them to lose. And I think that's worth something. So I think for Cyclone fans, I think you should look at that game as a situation where Iowa State could have, and in past year they could have, maybe should have, and in past years absolutely would have lost to a G6 on the road and not ruined, but really put a big damper on what is otherwise a stellar start to this season. So we don't need the doom and gloom. This is still a good football team. We're going to talk a little bit. We're going to figure out, the question is, how good is the team? How good are the people you've beat? But we'll talk about them in a little bit.